She murmured another man's name in her sleep. 2 weeks later, I met him at a bar. We compared messages. That same night, she got 2 breakup texts. I never considered myself a jealous man. Suspicion was something I saw in others. People who checked phones behind backs. People who grew tense when their partners lingered too long in conversation with someone else. That was not me. At least, not until one night when I woke up and heard my girlfriend whisper another man's name in her sleep. It was late, close to 3 in the morning. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the street lamp outside and her breathing beside me. Then, clear as if she were awake, Lena murmured, "Victor." The word slid out of her mouth softly, dreamlike, but it didn't feel harmless. It was too distinct, too intentional, like a thought that had been living rent-free in her head. I froze. For a moment, I told myself it meant nothing. People talk nonsense in their sleep all the time. But the name hung there like a dropped knife. I couldn't unhear it. I lay awake until dawn, watching her sleep peacefully, wondering who Victor was. The next morning, Lena acted like everything was normal. She brewed coffee, scrolled through her phone, and talked about her plans for the day. I wanted to ask her directly, but something in me held back. Maybe I was afraid of her answer. Or maybe I knew that if I confronted her too early, she'd know I was suspicious and cover her tracks. Instead, I began to watch. Lena worked in marketing for a clothing brand, a job that often involved late nights and social events. Until then, I'd never questioned it. Now, every excuse sounded like a rehearsal. She would say she had dinner with colleagues, or a networking event, or that she was too tired to talk when she got home. I noticed small details I hadn't paid attention to before. Her phone always tilted away when she typed, the way she laughed at messages then quickly locked the screen, the sudden habit of turning on Do Not Disturb at night. One evening, she claimed she was meeting coworkers for drinks. I didn't say anything, just nodded. When she left, I waited 15 minutes and called one of her close friends, Nadia, under the pretense of asking about a birthday party. Nadia mentioned she hadn't seen Lena in weeks because of all the late work nights. It didn't line up. I thanked her and hung up, my chest tightening. I wasn't the type to snoop through her phone, but I began to notice her patterns. She guarded it closely now. Even in the shower, it came with her. That was new. She never used to care. For 2 weeks, I kept my observations quiet. I went through the motions of daily life, but beneath the surface I was cataloging every shift in her behavior. The lies weren't obvious, but they piled up like dust in corners, small, almost invisible until you looked closely, and then impossible to ignore. The strangest part was how affectionate she still acted around me. She kissed me goodnight, held my hand, and made plans for the weekend. It created a dissonance I couldn't shake. If she cared enough to act normal, why whisper another man's name? Why hide her phone like a vault? My sleep turned restless. Every night, I waited, half expecting to hear the name again. Some nights, she only mumbled nonsense. Other nights, she was silent. But the absence of the word didn't erase the memory. It sat in the back of my mind like a splinter. One night, after she had fallen asleep early, I sat in the living room with the lights off. My laptop glowed faintly as I worked on a project, but my mind wasn't on the screen. I kept hearing the sound of her voice, saying, "Victor." I replayed it in my head like a recording. The softness of it, almost tender. I tried to rationalize. Maybe Victor was a client. Maybe a friend from the past. Maybe I was inventing connections that weren't there. But the more I thought about it, the more I noticed her distance in certain moments. The way she smiled at her phone and then turned it over, the sudden uptick in her late returns. The tipping point came one Friday night. She texted me that she'd be home late from a team dinner. Around 11, I was still awake, scrolling through channels, when I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window just enough to see Lena stepping out of a rideshare. She lingered by the curb, smiling at her phone, before walking inside. When she came through the door, she acted casual, kicking off her heels and asking if I'd eaten. But I couldn't unsee that look she gave her phone, the same look she used to give me in the early months of our relationship. I lay awake that night with the weight of silence pressing down on me. I wanted to confront her, but I also wanted to be certain. Accusations without proof can destroy trust, and if somehow I was wrong, I'd never undo the damage. So I decided to wait, to be patient, to let the truth come to me instead of chasing it blindly. Over the next 2 weeks, my life turned into quiet observation. I became hyper-aware of everything Lena did. The way she lingered in the bathroom with her phone. The new perfume that appeared on her dresser, a scent she never wore for me. The slight change in her tone when she talked about work. And then there was the dream name, Victor, echoing in my mind whenever she was out of sight. I didn't mention it to anyone. Not to friends, not to family. This wasn't a story I wanted circulating until I had the ending. But inside, I was changing. I wasn't the same man who laughed at the idea of jealousy. I was sharper now, more alert. I studied her like a puzzle with missing pieces. It wasn't healthy, I knew that, but it felt necessary. Then came the night that altered everything. 2 weeks after I first heard her murmur the name, I found myself at a bar after a long day at work. I hadn't planned to go, but a colleague invited me out for a drink, and when he left early, I stayed. I didn't want to go home yet. The bar was dim, half empty, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I sat nursing a beer, lost in thought. That's when I heard someone at the counter introduce himself to the bartender. Victor. The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. My head snapped up. There he was. Mid-30s, dark hair, confident, but not flashy. He spoke casually, like someone comfortable in his own skin. And just like that, the puzzle pieces began to slide into place. At first I told myself it couldn't be the same man. But something inside me already knew. I didn't approach him right away. Instead, I watched. He ordered a whiskey, checked his phone, smiled at a message. The same smile I had seen on Lena's face just a week before. My chest tightened. I knew then that my suspicion was no longer a theory. It was about to become fact. I sat at my table with my beer untouched, staring at the man who had just spoken his name. Victor. The same word Lena had whispered in her sleep. The same word that had gnawed at me for 2 weeks straight. Now, that word had a face, and he was standing 10 feet away, ordering a whiskey like this night meant nothing. I could have walked out. I could have left, pretended I never heard him, and buried myself back into the comfortable lie of uncertainty. But I didn't. Something inside me refused. I'd been patient, cautious, even paranoid. And here was the moment of clarity I'd been waiting for. So I stood, walked over to the bar, and slid onto the stool 2 seats from him. The bartender handed him his drink, and he lifted it to his lips. His phone buzzed on the counter. He checked it quickly, smiled, and typed a reply. That smile was like a match dropped on gasoline. I'd seen it before. I knew exactly who he was texting. I ordered another beer just to steady myself. He glanced over, nodded politely, and raised his glass in a casual gesture. For a moment, it felt like 2 strangers sharing a quiet drink. But my mind was a storm. I started small talk first, something neutral about the whiskey brand he ordered. He responded easily, friendly enough, with the ease of someone who wasn't hiding from the world. The conversation drifted into work. He mentioned he worked in real estate, and that most of his days were long, with nights spent unwinding with good company. Good company. The phrase stung like a thorn. Finally, I said it. Not directly, not aggressively, but with enough weight to make him pause. You see anyone right now? He gave me a quick grin, then looked at his phone again before answering. Yeah, kind of. Nothing official, but it's been interesting. I kept my face neutral. What's her name? He hesitated. His thumb hovered over the glass of his phone. For a second, I thought he'd dodged the question. Then he said it. Lena. The sound of it confirmed everything. My chest went tight, but my expression didn't change. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Instead, I nodded slowly, as though the name meant nothing. Inside, though, the world tilted. All those weeks of suspicion, the whispered name in the night, the late work dinners, the perfume, the secrecy, it all collapsed into one hard fact. I stared at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to a photo of Lena and me from a trip last summer. The 2 of us on a beach, her arms around my neck, smiling into the sun. I turned the screen and slid it toward him. He blinked, leaned closer, and then froze. His smile drained. You're kidding. No, I said flatly. I'm not. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of glasses clinking at another table. He set his whiskey down slowly, processing the reality. She told me she was single, he muttered, rubbing his jaw. Said she'd gotten out of a long relationship months ago. Nothing serious in her life. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Guess that was the first lie. I didn't answer. I was too busy studying him. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking like some thief who'd won. He looked genuinely blindsided. After a long pause, he picked up his phone. You want to see something? I didn't trust him, but I nodded. He opened his messages and scrolled through a thread. Lena's name lit up at the top. My stomach turned as I scanned the screen. Messages from just hours ago. Plans to meet. Photos of her in outfits I'd never seen in person. Compliments that made my blood run cold. Every text was another knife. But more than the betrayal, there was the clarity, the undeniable evidence that she had been playing us both. I handed the phone back. My hands felt heavy. He exhaled sharply. Looks like she thought she could juggle 2 lives. Guess she underestimated the odds of us crossing paths. We sat there in silence for a while, 2 strangers bound by the same wound. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man whose name had haunted me was now my reluctant ally. He signaled the bartender for another drink, then turned to me. So what do you want to do? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Part of me wanted to walk away, cut ties, erase her from my life without another word. But another part, the deeper, angrier part, wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I met his eyes. She doesn't get to keep both. Tonight, she loses everything. His expression hardened. He nodded once. We spent the next hour comparing notes. The timelines overlapped almost perfectly. Nights she claimed to be working late with colleagues were the same nights she was with him. Weekends she said she was visiting family lined up with weekend trips he'd mentioned. Even the perfume on her dresser, a gift from him. It wasn't just infidelity. It was choreography. Lies carefully woven to keep both of us in her orbit, blind to the truth. The more we uncovered, the more disgust replaced my anger. I realized Lena hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had manipulated every part of my trust, turning my patience into a cover for her double life. Victor's jaw tightened as he read over some of her older messages. She told me she was falling for me, said she'd never felt this way before. He looked at me bitterly. I'm guessing she said the same thing to you. I thought back to the last month, the way she kissed me goodnight while her phone buzzed with his messages. The thought made me sick. By the time the bar was closing, we had a plan. Not revenge in the dramatic sense. No shouting, no scenes, no violence. Just truth, delivered in a way she couldn't twist. She'll try to lie, I said. She'll deny, she'll spin, she'll make excuses. But if we both end it the same night, the same way, she can't wriggle out of it. Victor smirked grimly. 2 breakups, 1 night. That's poetic enough for me. We exchanged numbers, not because we wanted to stay in touch, but because coordination was key. He promised to forward me a few of the more damning screenshots. I agreed to share a photo or two that tied her storylines together. As we stood outside in the cool night air, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. 2 weeks ago, I'd woken to her whispering his name in her sleep. Tonight, I shook his hand. The circle had closed. Victor tucked his phone into his pocket. You know, she thought she was in control. People like that always do. But the funny thing about control is, once it slips, everything crashes at once. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We parted ways, each heading into the night with the same mission. She didn't know it yet, but Lena's carefully balanced game was about to collapse. And this time, I wasn't going to lose sleep waiting for the truth. I didn't sleep that night. After leaving the bar, I sat in my car with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. Everything I'd suspected had solidified into proof. The whispers, the lies, the name in her sleep, they weren't paranoia. They were reality. And now I had someone else's word, messages, and timelines to confirm it. When I walked into the apartment, Lena was asleep. Her phone glowed faintly on the nightstand. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the urge to snoop. I didn't need to. I knew enough. The next morning, she was cheerful. She made eggs, humming to herself like life was perfectly normal. Watching her, I felt like I was staring at a mask. Every smile, every casual remark, was painted on top of layers of deceit. I played along. I didn't want her to sense what was coming. Because this wasn't going to be a messy fight. It wasn't going to be screaming and slam doors. It was going to be sharp and final. Victor and I coordinated throughout the day. He forwarded me a string of messages Lena had sent him the night before. In one, she called me boring but safe. In another, she bragged about how easy it was to manage 2 lives. The words made my stomach turn, but they also fueled me. That evening, we agreed on the timing. 10 p.m. sharp. I spent the day acting like nothing had changed. Lena texted me in the afternoon, asking if I wanted takeout for dinner. I said yes. She came home with sushi, kissed me on the cheek, and settled on the couch beside me as if she hadn't spent the last 2 months splitting herself between 2 men. Every touch felt hollow. At 9:55, I excused myself to the bedroom. She stayed in the living room watching a show. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone, staring at the message I'd written. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't dramatic. It was simple, clean, impossible to misinterpret. I know about Victor. This is over. Don't contact me again. At exactly 10 o'clock, I hit send. A minute later, I heard her phone buzz in the living room. Then again. Her footsteps came quick. She appeared in the doorway, pale, holding her phone like it was a grenade about to explode. What is this? She demanded. Her voice was tight, trembling. I looked at her without flinching. Check your other messages. She blinked, confused, then glanced at her screen. I watched the color drain from her face. Victor had sent his own goodbye at the same moment. His words were just as cold, just as final. Her hands shook as she scrolled, piecing together what had happened. For the first time, I saw panic in her eyes. You talked to him? She stammered. Yes, I said. We compared everything. Every lie. Every excuse. Every night you thought you were clever. Her breath came fast. She sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. For once, she had no script. No clever cover. Just silence. Then came the scramble. She tried denial first, claiming Victor was just a friend, that I misunderstood, that the messages were jokes. But I shook my head. Don't bother. I saw everything. So did he. You don't get to explain your way out. When denial failed, she pivoted to anger. She shouted that I was violating her privacy, that I had no right to go behind her back. It was almost laughable. Her fury at being caught out shone any guilt for what she'd done. I let her rant. When she finished, I said quietly, "You played two lives at once. And tonight, both ended." The silence that followed was heavier than her shouting. She stormed out of the bedroom and paced the apartment, calling me paranoid, controlling, insecure. Then, when she realized none of it stuck, she tried desperation. She came back to the room, her voice softer now, begging me to listen, swearing she could change, that it hadn't meant anything. But I stayed firm. My resolve was like steel. For weeks I'd felt powerless, waiting for answers. Now, I held the truth in my hands, and I wasn't letting her twist it into something else. When she realized I wouldn't budge, her tone shifted again. Cold this time. Calculating. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think anyone's going to believe your version? I'll make sure they know you were the problem. But the thing about liars is, once exposed, their power crumbles." And hers was about to crumble faster than she expected. Because Victor wasn't keeping quiet either. By midnight, mutual friends were messaging me, confused and stunned. Screenshots were circulating. Lena's carefully crafted image, the loyal girlfriend, the dedicated worker, the charming social butterfly, was unraveling in real time. Nadia, the friend I called weeks ago, texted me. "She told me you were clingy and controlling, that you kept her from having fun." Now I see what she was really doing. It wasn't just my friends. Victor's circle knew too. Word spread quickly, and Lena's reputation started to rot. She had built her social life on trust, on charm, on being the girl everyone admired. Now people whispered when her name came up. The next morning, she left the apartment with a bag thrown together in anger. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even slam the door. She just walked out, her silence louder than any words. I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt something sharper. Justice. For the next week, the fallout escalated. Stories trickled back to me. At her office, rumors had started after someone forwarded the screenshots. She tried to claim they were fake, but people knew better. In a workplace built on networking and reputation, whispers were poison. Victor texted me once, just a short message. "She tried calling me 5 times last night. I didn't answer. Hope you didn't either." I hadn't. By the end of the week, Lena had lost not just 2 relationships, but the foundation of her double life. She had nothing left to juggle. The act was over. For me, it wasn't about revenge in the theatrical sense. It wasn't about seeing her beg or scream. It was about closure, the clean, undeniable severing of something built on lies. She had thought she could control the story, keep us both in orbit, manipulate the narrative. But the truth had been sharper than any excuse. And she'd learned that the hardest way possible, in one night, with 2 messages, from 2 men who refused to play her game anymore. For days after Lena walked out, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. No music playing while she cooked, no shoes scattered by the door, no sudden bursts of laughter from her phone screen. Just silence, heavy and final. At first, I thought the emptiness would hurt. Instead, it felt like oxygen. For weeks I had lived under a fog of suspicion, every glance at her phone a wait, every late return a silent question. Now the air was clear. Painful, yes, but clean. Lena, on the other hand, was anything but clean. The fallout gathered momentum quickly. Screenshots spread faster than she could contain them. Victor's circle passed them on, my friends shared their side. And soon enough Lena's two-faced routine was no longer a private scandal. It was public currency. Nadia told me that when Lena showed up to brunch with mutual friends, the atmosphere turned icy. No one wanted to sit beside her. Conversations dried up when she entered. She tried to joke it off, claiming jealous exes were spreading lies. But the proof was too detailed, too damning. She hadn't just betrayed 2 people. She'd underestimated how quickly burned bridges can collapse all at once. At work, it was worse. Marketing thrives on trust and image, and Lena's had cracked. A colleague of hers reached out to me indirectly, saying Lena had been quietly removed from a big client project. The official reason was restructuring. Everyone knew better. When clients caught wind of drama, companies protected the brand first. Victor filled me in on his side too. She had tried calling him at least 20 times in a single night, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between apologies and threats. When he didn't respond, she showed up at his office building. Security had to ask her to leave. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt justice. For once, the damage wasn't mine to bear. Weeks passed, and Lena's life continued to unravel. Her landlord served her a notice after she fell behind on rent. Friends she had leaned on stopped returning her calls. Even her family, who once saw her as the charming, dependable daughter, grew cold. Word had reached them, and they weren't impressed. I didn't see her directly during that time, though I heard plenty. But one night, nearly a month after the breakup, she showed up at the apartment. I opened the door to find her standing there in the hallway, looking thinner, paler, with eyes that had lost their brightness. She wasn't holding herself with the same effortless confidence I had known. She was clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was small. I didn't step aside. "There's nothing to talk about." She swallowed hard. "I messed up. I know I did. But it wasn't like you think." "It wasn't." I cut her off. "Don't. You had your chance to explain. You chose lies. You don't get another chance." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to step closer, but I stayed firm. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I lost everything. My job, my friends, everyone hates me." For a split second, I almost felt the old instinct to comfort her. But then I remembered the nights she lied to my face, the way she whispered another man's name beside me, the smugness in her texts calling me boring but safe. "You didn't lose everything," I said. "You threw it away." Her lips trembled. She stared at me for a long moment, as if searching for some shred of the man who used to forgive her mistakes. But that man was gone. Finally, she turned and walked down the hall, her footsteps echoing in the silence. I shut the door and felt no urge to open it again. That was the last time I saw her in person. The months that followed only deepened her downfall. I heard she bounced between short-term jobs, unable to hold on to any stability. Old friends kept their distance. The charm she once wielded had turned into a shadow that followed her everywhere. Meanwhile, my life shifted back into rhythm. The apartment became my space again. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the fog of suspicion. I threw myself into work, into new projects, into rebuilding the parts of myself that had been quietly corroded by doubt. Victor and I only spoke once more. He texted me out of the blue. "Hope you're doing better." I moved on, dating someone new. Clean slate. I replied simply, "Same. Good luck." That was enough. We didn't need a friendship. We'd been allies in a single battle, nothing more. As for Lena, karma worked with brutal precision. Her double life had been built on manipulation, on confidence, on the belief that she could control every angle. When the control slipped, everything collapsed. Not gradually, not with a warning, but all at once. 2 breakups in one night had been the trigger. The rest was the chain reaction she couldn't escape. And me? I didn't come out unscarred, but I came out free. Suspicion no longer haunted my nights. The name Victor no longer echoed in my head. The truth had burned away the fog, leaving clarity in its place. Sometimes, when I think back to that night, she murmured his name in her sleep. I wonder if some part of her wanted to be caught. Maybe her subconscious betrayed her because deep down, she knew the double life couldn't last. But in the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is that she lost both lives in a single night. And I walked away with the one thing she could never fake: peace.